woke up very, very early on the Wednesday morning between the death and the funeral, and I just sat down and wrote it, and it took about an hour and a half, and just came pouring out, really.
In a stunning revelation, Princess Diana's brother has stepped forward with a claim that has left the entire world in disbelief. With raw emotion and undeniable conviction, he declared, "I found out what really happened to Diana, and I brought proof." His shocking words have reignited decades of questions surrounding her tragic death, shaking the very foundation of the official story. What evidence does he hold, and why reveal it now? This bombshell disclosure could forever change how history remembers Diana's final moments. The night the world stopped. In the pre-dawn hours of August 31st, 1997, the streets of Paris bore witness to a tragedy that would shock the world. A sleek black Mercedes raced through the dark, echoing confines of a city tunnel, pursued relentlessly by the flashing lenses of paparazzi cameras. For years, Diana, Princess of Wales, had been hounded by photographers, her every movement scrutinized, every step invaded. That night, her attempt to evade the relentless chase ended in catastrophe. What had begun as a desperate flight for safety transformed into a violent collision of metal and glass, leaving the world holding its breath. The car crumpled on impact, twisted and mangled, beyond recognition, yet Diana survived the initial crash. Emergency responders arrived swiftly, pulling her from the wreckage, her body battered and critically injured. The frantic scenes in that Paris tunnel, hidden from public view, were a stark contrast to the calm composure she had always shown in public. In those tense, agonizing hours, the world waited, unaware that the unthinkable was about to be confirmed. Within hours, confirmation came. Diana, Princess of Wales, was dead.
Confirmation from our very own Foreign Secretary Robin Cook, who's in the Far East at the moment, that Diana, Princess of Wales, has in fact been killed in that car accident.
The news spread like wildfire across the globe, carried by television broadcasts, radio waves, and the earliest murmurs of internet forums. Cities fell silent as people struggled to process the enormity of the loss. Streets, shops, and homes paused, as if the world itself had been held hostage by grief. Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and countless royal residences became impromptu shrines, their gates lined with flowers, letters, and photographs from mourners desperate to pay tribute to the woman the world had come to love. Television cameras captured crowds in shock and sorrow, their faces buried in their hands, tears streaming freely, while newspapers chronicled the chaos of a world struggling to comprehend. Across continents, from the bustling streets of New York to quiet towns in Asia, millions felt the sting of disbelief, as if the very fabric of reality had been torn. Diana, known affectionately as the People's Princess, had touched hearts in ways few could explain, and her sudden passing left an emptiness that resonated universally. Yet behind this global outpouring of grief, a quieter, more complex story was unfolding. Inside royal walls, far from the throngs of mourners, silence reigned. The palace, bound by tradition and protocol, processed the shock in measured private ways. While the public cried, questioned, and demanded acknowledgement, the inner workings of the royal family navigated a delicate, controlled response. Within those walls, grief and confusion mingled with duty, creating a tension that would shape the narrative of that fateful day for years to come. While the world wept over Diana's tragic and untimely death, royal walls remained silent, guarding their secrets. But what could have been the reason behind this chilling silence? And did the monarchy's action shape the public's perception? Now, let's uncover how rigid royal protocol overshadowed grief. Silence in the House of Windsor. Outside the gates of Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, a tide of grief swept through London. Thousands of mourners flooded the streets, leaving mountains of flowers, letters, photographs, and candles. Each bouquet, each note, was a testament to the profound love the public held for Diana, Princess of Wales. Across the city, the air seemed heavy with sorrow, every whispered conversation and tearful embrace echoing the heartbreak of a nation. News channels broadcast images of impromptu memorials, capturing waves of grief that spilled into every corner of Britain and beyond. The world watched, stunned, as the people expressed openly what many felt privately: the loss of a beloved figure whose warmth and humanity had touched millions. Yet just a few hundred miles away, in the remote calm of Balmoral Castle, an entirely different reality unfolded. There, within the confines of the royal estate, the atmosphere was suffocatingly still. The usual symbols of mourning, flags lowered to half-mast, official statements, gestures of empathy, were absent. Silence reigned where words of comfort might have belonged. For days, no acknowledgement came from the Queen. Newspapers, accustomed to maintaining a respectful distance from royal protocol, grew increasingly insistent, their headlines probing the lack of response. Questions rang out across the country. Why had the monarchy not marked the death of the princess? Why was there no visible sign of mourning from the family at the heart of the nation's grief? Inside Balmoral, the royal children faced a personal, silent ordeal. Princes William and Harry, only 15 and 12 years old, were placed in an environment dominated by strict ritual and enforced composure rather than warmth or consolation. Every action was measured, every emotion subdued, leaving little room for the raw human grief that had overtaken the world outside. For young Harry, the absence of acknowledgement and the formality of those around him only intensified his confusion and pain. Time and again he asked the same devastating question, his small voice carrying the weight of unimaginable loss. Is she really gone? For Charles Spencer, Diana's devoted brother, the atmosphere at Balmoral was hauntingly unnatural. Outside, the streets overflowed with grief. Flowers, tears, and heartfelt tributes poured in from a nation in mourning. Inside, the royal household remained rigid, composed, and painfully silent, each gesture measured by protocol rather than feeling. To Spencer, the contrast was impossible to ignore. The carefully maintained stoicism, the delayed statements, the adherence to tradition over tenderness, all screamed of a system that valued image above humanity. Every quiet corridor, every unspoken word, became proof that the palace had placed ritual over compassion, leaving emotional needs unacknowledged. In Spencer's eyes, the royal family's response prioritized protocol over people, leaving even Diana's children to face tragedy alone. But what made Charles Spencer so deeply affected by their actions? Now, let's explore the extraordinary bond between him and Diana that shaped his grief and fierce protectiveness. Bound by blood and trust, Charles Spencer, the 9th Earl. Spencer was more than just Princess Diana's younger brother. He had long carried an intense, almost instinctive sense of protectiveness toward his sister. From the earliest days of their lives, a unique bond had formed between them. A connection forged through shared experiences, whispered confidences, and the challenges of growing up in a family marked by distance and division. Though Charles had 3 older siblings, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, Lady Jane Fellows, and Diana herself, it was the Princess of Wales who became his closest companion, her presence a guiding light through his formative years. Diana was 3 years his senior, and their proximity in age meant they shared more than just a family name. They shared a mutual understanding and emotional intimacy that the others, occupied with their own lives, could not provide. Sarah and Jane, older by 9 and 7 years respectively, were often away at boarding school during much of Charles's childhood. Their absence left a vacuum, a space filled only by the quieter yet profoundly significant presence of Diana. The responsibility of raising them fell largely upon their father, John Spencer, who had been granted custody after the family's 1969 divorce from Frances Shand Kidd, their mother. While John offered a steady, calming influence in the home, providing quiet support and encouragement, Diana became a source of both companionship and guidance for her younger brother. Charles later reflected that their father, though loving, had a reserved nature, and their mother, though devoted in her own way, was ill-suited to the demands of full-time parenthood, a circumstance that, in many ways, intensified the bond between Diana and him. Charles and Diana navigated their childhood side by side, leaning on each other for comfort, laughter, and guidance through the uncertainties of youth. Their bond went far beyond mere sibling ties. It was a deep connection built on trust, loyalty, and unspoken understanding. In moments when the wider family could not grasp the intensity of their feelings, they found solace in one another, sharing secrets, jokes, and heartfelt conversations. Charles often reflected on this closeness, describing how they were very much in it together, a partnership that became a steady anchor, providing emotional balance amid the turbulent challenges of growing up. As Charles and Diana moved into adulthood, their connection only grew stronger, transforming from a childhood companionship into a profound, unbreakable bond. This deep intimacy became the bedrock of Charles's fierce protective instincts, which would later define his actions after Diana's tragic passing. The closeness they had nurtured in the quiet corners of a fractured household left an indelible mark on him, compelling him to shield her memory and watch over her children. Even in her absence, the love, trust, and understanding they had shared endured, guiding his unwavering commitment to honor Diana's legacy and safeguard her family. Bound by love and loss, Charles safeguarded Diana's legacy, yet behind public mourning, actions unfolded that deeply unsettled him. What truly happened after her tragic death that angered him? Now, let's dive into the shocking ways royal protocol prioritized image over the hearts of children. The coffin walk that haunted Harry. On that unforgettable September day in 1997, the world bore witness to an image that would sear itself into collective memory. Two young boys trailing solemnly behind the coffin of their mother, Princess Diana. To millions watching on television and lining the streets of London, the procession appeared as the embodiment of courage and composure, a public display of grief transformed into quiet strength. Every step the boys took was captured by cameras, every tearless glance magnified and broadcast across continents. Their silence was praised as stoicism, their mourning interpreted as bravery. Yet behind the polished images and media narratives lay a far more painful and complex reality, one that was known intimately to Charles Spencer, Diana's devoted brother. The official story propagated by the palace suggested that the young princes had chosen, of their own volition, to walk in the funeral procession. But Spencer, with a deep understanding of both his sister's nature and the rigid workings of the royal institution, knew the truth. There had been no true choice. William and Harry were children navigating the unthinkable, placed in the glare of a global stage by the very system that was supposed to shield and protect them. The walk behind their mother's coffin, framed as an act of personal courage, was in reality a ritual imposed by protocol, a symbolic performance designed to uphold the image of the monarchy at a devastating personal cost. For Harry, then only 12 years old, that solemn march became more than a fleeting memory. It transformed into a lasting trauma. Each flash of the cameras that had followed their every step served as a permanent imprint of a day that no child should have to endure. The cries of the public, the mounting grief surrounding them, and the unyielding expectations of the institution converged into a moment of deep, incomprehensible sorrow. Every step felt measured, every glance scrutinized, leaving no space for genuine grief, comfort, or the natural expressions of loss that a child requires. To Spencer, the procession became Exhibit A, an undeniable testament to the harsh realities of royal life. It illustrated how the institution, bound by tradition, protocol, and the relentless pursuit of public perception, had willingly subordinated the emotional well-being of two children to protect its image. In the years that followed, he reflected on that day not merely as a moment of personal anguish for his nephews, but as a stark warning about the human cost of rigid hierarchy and the prioritization of appearance over empathy. The image of William and Harry walking behind their mother's coffin remained etched in history, not just as a scene of collective mourning, but as evidence of a system that demanded sacrifice from the youngest and most vulnerable. Through Spencer's eyes, the coffin walk symbolized tragedy, grief, control, and protocol's cost on children. But beyond the public spectacle, how deeply did Diana's death cut into Spencer's own heart? Now let's uncover Charles Spencer's intimate reflections on the enduring pain and lasting impact of losing his beloved sister. An irreplaceable void. Charles Spencer, the 9th Earl Spencer, has long spoken with remarkable honesty about the profound emotional toll of Princess Diana's untimely death and the enduring bond they shared throughout their lives. The loss of his sister, he revealed, was more than a personal tragedy. It was, in his words, such an amputation. The words capture the depth of a grief that is both visceral and constant. To lose someone who had been a central part of one's life since childhood, someone who shared jokes, confidences, and daily moments, is to feel an emptiness that cannot be filled. For Spencer, Diana was not only family, she was a companion, a confidant, and a constant presence whose absence left an irreparable void. Reflecting on the experience of losing a sibling, the historian emphasized the extraordinary nature of such grief. Unlike friendships or romantic attachments, siblings occupy a unique space in one's life. They are part of the earliest memories, the foundational years of identity, and the daily rhythms of growing up. The death of such a person leaves a gap that is both deeply personal and persistently haunting. For Charles, this gap was not merely emotional. It was entwined with the recollections of shared experiences, laughter, and even the ordinary moments that now became impossible to relive. Charles has described, with quiet poignancy, the surreal nature of life after Diana's passing. For years, he would catch himself thinking that he should call her to share a story, a joke, or a thought, only to remember that such conversations were now forever impossible. Their shared sense of humor and understanding had been an enduring part of his life, and the sudden impossibility of that connection amplified the sense of loss. The realization that those familiar moments could never return made the grief more complex and layered. In his memoir, A Very Private School, a memoir, Charles further reflected on the way Diana's death symbolized the loss of a key part of his own childhood. So many memories were intertwined with her presence. The mischiefs, the confidences, the quiet understandings, and without her, a portion of his formative years felt irretrievably altered. The depth of their connection ensured that her absence was never temporary. It left a permanent mark on his life, shaping his perspective on family, love, and vulnerability. Through these reflections, Charles Spencer not only conveys the intimate bond he shared with Diana, but also illuminates the enduring human impact of her loss. His words remind the world that grief is not a single moment, but an ongoing journey, one shaped by the people who leave the most lasting imprint on the heart. Grief lingers, love leaves lasting marks, and Diana's memory shapes every heart it touched. But can Spencer ever speak with a force strong enough for the world to hear? Now let's delve into Charles Spencer's explosive eulogy as he unveils the hidden truths behind Diana's tragic final hours, breaking royal silence. Inside the hallowed walls of Westminster Abbey, a moment unfolded that shattered centuries of royal tradition. Charles Spencer, the 9th Earl Spencer, stepped forward not simply to pay tribute to his beloved sister, Diana, Princess of Wales, but to confront the very powers and pressures that had relentlessly pursued her. With measured determination, he took the pulpit, and in his voice resonated both grief and righteous indignation. He painted a stark portrait of Diana as the most hunted person of the modern age, a phrase that cut through the solemnity of the Abbey and echoed in the hearts of those listening around the world. Spencer's words were not mere mourning. They were a bold indictment. He exposed the ruthless machinery of the press, whose flashbulbs had dogged Diana for decades, intruding on every private moment and turning her life into public spectacle. More than that, he held up a mirror to the very institutions surrounding her, formal structures that failed to shield, comfort, or defend her in the moments when protection was most needed. In that space of grandeur and centuries-old protocol, his voice rang with a rare defiance, challenging the conventions that demanded silence and composure over truth and empathy. As he spoke, his promise to safeguard Diana's sons, William and Harry, reverberated through the nave, a thunderous vow that pierced the ceremonial stillness. This was a declaration not of resentment alone, but of duty and love. Applause, uncommon in such solemn proceedings, rippled through the assembly, a spontaneous acknowledgement of honesty and courage breaking through the rigid expectations of royalty. Every eye and ear in that abbey became witness to a truth that could not be contained by tradition or decorum. Diana's suffering was no tragic accident, no cruel twist of fate. It was the product of relentless forces, media, expectation, and systemic neglect that had shadowed her until her final, untimely breath. Spencer's eulogy transformed the ceremony from a ritual of mourning into a historic reckoning. His words offered clarity to a grieving world, revealing the hidden dimensions of loss that extended far beyond the personal. Millions watching on television screens across continents understood, perhaps for the first time, that Diana's life, while celebrated, had been constrained by pressures invisible to the public eye, pressures that her family and her children would continue to navigate long after the ceremony ended. This was more than an address. It was a landmark assertion of accountability and remembrance. By speaking with such precision, honesty, and courage, Charles Spencer not only honored the memory of his sister but also established a lasting narrative that Diana's life, struggles, and legacy were intertwined with forces that could not simply be ignored. In that solemn moment, the Abbey became both a stage for grief and a forum for truth, offering a rare glimpse into the realities behind the crown, the cameras, and the headlines. Spencer's words pierced the silence, unveiling hidden truths, exposing betrayal, and safeguarding Diana's legacy. Yet the question remains: who will carry this vow forward to truly protect her memory? Now, let's dive into how Harry courageously defied royal tradition to honor his mother's legacy. Breaking the cycle. The silence that gripped the House of Windsor in 1997 did not simply vanish with time. It planted invisible seeds that would continue to bear consequences for decades. The chilling restraint of those early days, marked by formal protocol and carefully measured statements, left deep imprints on the young princes, William and Harry. For Harry, the trauma of walking behind his mother's coffin, every step observed by millions, was not just a fleeting memory. It became a defining moment, a wound that remained etched into his psyche long after the final mourners had dispersed. Each flash of a camera, each public display of grief observed by the world, reminded him of the vulnerability and scrutiny that had surrounded his mother, Princess Diana, until her final hours. Years later, Harry witnessed a haunting echo of that same scrutiny directed at his own wife, Meghan. The relentless media attention, often intrusive and hostile, combined with an institutional detachment that seemed impervious to empathy, mirrored the pressures that had plagued his mother. The patterns of control, expectation, and the rigid demand for composure were still very much present, as if the lessons of the past had been ignored. Harry recognized the danger. Without intervention, the same cycle of exposure, emotional strain, and lack of protection that had defined Diana's final years would continue, repeating itself in his own family. Unlike in 1997, Harry chose a path of action. In 2020, he and Meghan made the unprecedented decision to step back from their formal royal duties, moving away from the glare of official life in the United Kingdom. This decision was not born of defiance for its own sake. It was a deliberate effort to break the pattern that had consumed his mother and to safeguard the well-being of his family. The choice to walk away from tradition and expectation was both courageous and deeply personal. It symbolized a refusal to accept a system that prioritized appearances over human welfare and an insistence that personal agency and protection of loved ones could not be sacrificed on the altar of protocol. In this bold move, the warnings that Charles Spencer had sounded after Diana's death found their resonance. His insistence that the institution's cold detachment had harmed both Diana and her children was echoed in Harry's decision to reclaim control over his own life and the lives of those he loved. Once again, Diana's legacy revealed its dual nature. It was a story of profound tragedy, yes, but it was also a story of defiance, of challenging systems designed to prioritize image over humanity. Her influence extended far beyond her life, shaping decisions, inspiring protective instincts, and reminding the world that true care and compassion cannot be constrained by tradition. In stepping away, Harry not only honored his mother's memory, but also asserted a timeless lesson that the value of human life, love, and well-being must always outweigh the rigid codes of appearance, protocol, and expectation. Harry defied centuries of royal tradition, fiercely protecting his family while carrying Diana's legacy forward. But what does this truly reveal? Could it expose how Diana was betrayed by both the press and protocol, leaving her sons trapped in silence instead of nurtured with love? Let's uncover the shocking truth. Charles Spencer's shocking revelation. Charles Spencer's fury, the unwavering defiance in his words, and the enduring emotional weight carried by Princes William and Harry are far more than recollections of grief. They are undeniable proof. Proof that Diana, Princess of Wales, was relentlessly pursued and ultimately betrayed by both the invasive press and the rigid structures of royal protocol. Proof that her children, instead of being cradled in comfort and understanding, were thrust into a world that demanded silence, composure, and endurance beyond their years. Proof that the cold, measured detachment of the monarchy left wounds not only visible in public gestures, but etched into the very fabric of the boys' lives. These were not mere stories or abstract grievances. They were tangible, living evidence of a system that valued appearance over humanity. On that fateful day in September 1997, Spencer delivered a message that stunned the world, not through sensational claims or conspiracies, but with the piercing clarity of truth. In the hushed grandeur of Westminster Abbey, his words cut through centuries of carefully maintained royal decorum. He named the hunters, holding the paparazzi accountable for their relentless pursuit, and in doing so, drew a line between negligence, exploitation, and accountability. He did not flinch, and he did not soften. His speech was a direct challenge to the forces that had contributed to his sister's tragic death. In his defiance, he offered more than sorrow. He offered a call for awareness, protection, and acknowledgement, making it impossible for the world to ignore the human cost behind the headlines. Spencer's vow to protect Diana's sons was not ceremonial. It was a pledge forged in the crucible of loss. William and Harry, young and vulnerable, were shielded not by empty tradition, but by the fierce determination of an uncle who understood both the dangers that lurked beyond palace gates and the deep emotional void left by their mother's absence. The scars they carried were visible in posture, in fleeting expressions, and in moments when grief resurfaced despite the public expectation of composure. Each glance, each pause in conversation testified to the weight of their childhood burden, a burden imposed not by fate alone, but by a system unprepared to nurture, console, or prioritize their well-being. Through his bold words and actions, Charles Spencer lifted the veil on the hidden truths surrounding the tragedy of the people's princess. He revealed a stark reality where human vulnerability was buried beneath the weight of rigid ceremony, where the heartache and cries of an entire nation were met with chilling silence from the very institution that was meant to shield, comfort, and guide those in its care. By boldly naming the relentless hunters and vowing to protect her children, Charles Spencer unveiled a truth that would echo through generations. He laid bare the full weight of betrayal, exposing the forces that relentlessly pursued Diana and left lasting scars on those she loved most. His words transformed grief into undeniable evidence, turning sorrow into a striking testament. What unfolded was not just mourning, but a revelation. Clarity intertwined with heartbreak, proving the magnitude of Diana's life, her struggles, and her enduring legacy. But what do you think about Princess Diana's brother's proof that stunned the world? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments.